Hi, Han.
Matt, I believe Congressman Grothman is on.
Here I am. Can you all hear me?
I see that. Hi, Congressman Grothman. How are you? Thank you for joining us this morning.
Good. Well, we're looking forward to this. It's a good group of people. And like always, I wish I could see you in person, but if this is what we got, this is what we have.
Well, thank you for being here. Looks like we have a good group coming on. So I see that we're at the top of the hour. So Art, if that's okay with you, I'll go ahead and introduce the congressman. Or do you want me to wait another minute or two?
Why don't you wait, just like another 30 seconds or
30
something
seconds.
and let a few more get on and then introduce the congressman.
Thank you. All right. So thank you everybody for being here today on behalf of the Coalition for a 21st Century Postal Coalition. It is my privilege to introduce Congressman Glenn Grothman, who has represented Wisconsin's 6th district since 2014. He has been a champion for efficient government and a tireless advocate for small businesses. During his career in Congress, he has been tenacious in his oversight of the federal government. And in addition to serving on the House Committee on Oversight and Reform, he also serves on the Budget and Education and Labor Committees. Earlier this month, as many of us know, he authored a very strong bipartisan letter to postal leadership on an issue that is so critical to all of us, expressing opposition to the substantial rate increases requested by USPS earlier this year. Congressman, thank you so much for these efforts and for being here with us this morning. And now I'd like to turn it over to you.
Well, thanks. As I said before, I wish we could all be in person, but this is what we have. I'd like to thank you guys for inviting me to speak to you today about the Postal Service, including its significance, its challenges, and what Congress should be doing to improve the Postal Service, both for its longevity and its service to the American people. If you don't know, the Post Office, of course, is in the U.S. Constitution, unlike a lot of other governmental agencies, in which Article 1, Section 8, Clause 7 authorizes Congress to establish a post office. The Congress passed the Postal Reorganization Act in 1970, which established the Postal Service as an independent executive agency and directed it to work towards self-funding. Thus, Congress has a compelling interest in ensuring the durability while also preserving its self-sustainment and independence from the federal government. One of the significant challenges for the Postal Service right now is facing or continuing its financial sustainability. Like all things, with the good, bad comes with this. Since the rise of the internet, mail volumes declined every year over the past 2 decades. With this decline in mail volume, the Postal Service has faced severe losses, including $87 billion over the last 14 years and a projected loss of $160 billion over the next 10 years if no action is taken. Earlier this year, the Postal Service released its 10-year business plan, Delivering for America, to improve its service standards and place it on a good financial footing. Much of its plan seeks to strengthen its service and operations to maximize reliable performance, including by modernizing the delivery fleet with the next generation delivery vehicle. Its plan also asks Congress to do its part in aiding the Postal Service in achieving financial sustainability. Congress is making some headway here. The Committee on Oversight, which I'm a part of, passed H.R. 3076, a bipartisan reform package that includes a provision to repeal the Postal Service's pre-funding requirement, which you'd have to admit in a way was unfair, integrate the Postal Service retirees into Medicare, and several provisions that codify or support the reforms in the Postal Service's 10-year business plan. A similar bill was passed in the Senate on May 19th. The bipartisan reform bill will help stabilize the financial health of the Postal Service and maintain that financial health through significant operational reforms. As a co-sponsor of the legislation, I'd like to see Congress take this up as quickly as possible. While Congress is working to reform the financial sustainability, I'm concerned about the recent development related to rate increases. We have to be aware how many businesses are dramatically affected whenever the Postal Service increases its rates. Last November, the Postal Regulatory Commission granted authority to the Postal Service to increase rates for market dominant products above the Consumer Price Index. At the end of May, the Postal Service decided to utilize this authority, and they're requesting a substantial increase from 6.8 to 8.8% for products such as newspapers, magazines, and catalogs. To be clear, this is going to be the second increase this year, in addition to the inflation-adjusted increase of 1.8% applied in January. There's a lot of concern about the impact about this big of a mid-year rate increase, what effect it will have on the employers across the country. I have a number of employers in my district that are directly affected by this increase and will result in a significant decline in their use of the Postal Service, which will result in significant job losses at their business. Right now, the mailing industry accounts for 7.3 million jobs across the country and about 4.5% of the country's labor force. I'd encourage any staff on this call to have their members reach out to those in the mailing industry and to learn more about the impacts that this upcoming rate increase is going to have on their business and their employees. Myself and my friend from Virginia, Mr. Conley, recently led a letter to the post office urging them to delay the increase. Unfortunately, the Postal Service is still planning to move forward, which is a little bit irritating, not the right thing to do. I would also encourage your members to personally contact the Postal Service and tell them to delay this rate increase. With Congress actively working to pass bipartisan postal reform that will help put the Postal Service on strong footing, the mid-year increase may be premature. With that, I'll close in reminding everyone on this call, we all know how significant the Postal Service is and the impact on all of our constituents. Thanks for being here. Thanks for taking time to see what's going on in Washington and to learn more importance on this topic. I do like the current Postmaster General. Disappointed this happened on his watch, but we'll have to see what happens in the future, and we'll just have to keep fighting. So, like everything else, it comes down to organization and work. But thank you for having me.
Congressman, thank you so much for those comments and for just your consistent and engagement on behalf of all the small businesses and all the businesses here today that rely on the Postal Service and rely on that very large economy that you're talking about. So we really appreciate your time this morning. I know you have a busy schedule. So we are going to, out of respect for your time, we won't take questions since we have a large group today. But thank you so much for your leadership and keep up the good work on behalf of our industry.
Thank you.
So a quick housekeeping note. So this session is going to have two panels. And I'm going to turn it over momentarily to Art Sackler, who's the Executive Director of the Coalition for a 21st Century Postal Service. One other reminder is that this Zoom briefing is being recorded. We will have a recording of this afterward. So with that, I would love to turn it over to Art Sackler, who will be showing us a brand new video today.
Thank you, Matt, and good morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate it, and I want to add to Matt's gratitude to Congressman Grothman for not only coming today, but for fully understanding the issues and taking the step he did with Mr. Connolly in a bipartisan way, urging deferral of some punishing rate increases that will come into effect at the end of August. As Matt just mentioned, let's start with a very short video. It's 3 minutes, and I think it'll set the stage nicely.
During the COVID-19 pandemic, the Postal Service was an important lifeline for Americans, delivering medicines, PPE, food, and other household staples. And for many, it still is, and always has been. From the biggest cities to isolated parts of rural America, the Postal Service serves more than 161 million delivery points across the country, going the last mile to deliver, no matter the weather, or how far, or how rural. Want to know the best part? Aside from some minor funding for its charitable work and one-time emergency funding from Congress to cover COVID expenses, the Postal Service receives no taxpayer dollars. With virtually every business and person in the country relying on it, the Postal Service actually generated over $73 billion in revenue in 2020, more than it did in 2019. If it were a private sector company, USPS would be ranked 46th in the 2020 Fortune 500. But the Postal Service is not a private company. It's overseen by Congress. Now, you may have heard that the Postal Service is in financial trouble, but that's where it gets complicated. In 2006, Congress required the Postal Service to set aside billions of dollars each year to fund retiree health benefits, 75 years in advance. A huge expenditure that it cannot pay and still deliver the mail. It's something no other company or government entity is required to do. And it is the single cause of over 90% of the Postal Service's losses since then. Fortunately, the Postal Service Reform Act would free the Postal Service from that punishing requirement. But there is still an unnecessary effort to slow the mail and to make it more expensive for everyone, even as we recover economically from the COVID-19 pandemic. In late August, first-class postage and forever stamps will increase. Rates for most mail-in will rise by 7%, and charities, nonprofits, newspapers, magazines, and catalogs will face a staggering 8.8% postage hike at a time when they can afford it least. It's the second time postage has increased this year, and if we don't do something about it, these hikes will keep happening. Already, the postage hikes and service delays are having a negative effect, and if left unchecked, they will do more damage to Americans and the Postal Service. Just consider this. A new national survey found that 77% of Americans have little to no awareness of the upcoming postage increases, which will then cause 65% of people to consider shifting communications from USPS. And as delivery times slow, 73% will consider shifting business communications from USPS. USPS needs help, but it also needs to be held accountable. Congress should enact the Postal Service Reform Act, but it should also direct the Postal Regulatory Commission to reconsider its decision to allow these excessive rates. Let's make sure the Postal Service can continue fulfilling its duty to serve. Visit 21stcenturypostal.org to learn more about postal reform and the industries that support and rely on the U.S. Postal Service.
So that was just to set the stage for the discussions to come. Just a word on our coalition. We are a broad cross-section of an industry that in 2019 generated nearly 1.6 trillion in sales and employed more than 7 million workers. And we'll have more on that in just a moment. We do support, as you heard in the video, the Postal Service Reform Act, which is enjoying broad bipartisan support in both houses. We're very pleased about that. It eliminates the pre-funding of retiree health benefits overhang on the postal system, and it codifies 6-day delivery in an integrated network, which is what we have today and something that is necessary as we head into the future. So let's get started with our panels for this morning. Our first panel is going to be looking at the system and looking at our recent survey conducted by Bellwether Citizen Response, which was a national survey of public attitudes toward the Postal Service in light of the recent changes, both proposed and now in stages of implementation. And then another study that's been done of the financials of the Postal Service that shows that its situation can improve dramatically without the need for these rather, in our view, certainly excessive rate increases. So first on our panel will be Cheryl Chapman, who has worked for International Paper for over 30 years in multiple roles. She's director of the Envelope Manufacturing Association Foundation's Institute of Postal Studies and on the board of the Global Envelope Alliance, and has served on as the EMA Board of Trustees chairman. Cheryl is the co-author of EMA's Mailing Industry Job Studies, the gold standard of defining the industry and referred to often by members of Congress, among others. She has a chemical engineering degree from Auburn. We have the co-founders of Bellwether Citizen Response, a nonpartisan public policy research and analysis firm that relies on behavioral and neuroscience factors to get at results. And they have recently conducted a poll on public attitudes toward the Postal Service, as I mentioned. The first co-founder is Alyssa Moses, who is also a co-founder of Hark Connect and the CEO of Brain Group Global. She's on the faculty at Columbia University in technology management, and among much else, she is a former CEO of Ipsos Neuro and Behavioral Science and held senior positions at Gray, BBDO, and Phillips. Kimberly Clark is her co-founder. She is a neuroscientist and on the Dartmouth faculty in the field of cognitive science. She is, as I mentioned, a co-founder and chief research officer of Bellwether and of Merchant Mechanics. She is a neuromarketing and shopper journey expert and has done work for both DARPA and DoD. She's been extensively published in academic journals. Mary Donovan is a principal and senior economist at NDP Analytics. Her work in innovation, e-commerce, healthcare, and other policy areas has been nationally recognized. She holds a master's degree in applied economics from the University of Maryland and a bachelor's degree from the State University of New York College at Geneseo. So thank you all for being here. And Cheryl, why don't we start with you?
Well, thank you. And let me just go ahead and get the video, the presentation up. Good morning. Thank you so much in your interest in this very important topic. Today, I'm going to review the results of EMA Foundation's Mailing Industry Economic Job Study. This study measures the economic scope and impact of the mailing industry on the United States economy. Even as internet usage expands, mail remains a critical part of communications among consumers, businesses, and government at all levels. For over a decade, the EMA Foundation has released the U.S. Mailing Industry Economic Job Studies, which estimate the number of jobs due to the mailing industry and the revenue associated with this industry. This study helps explain the relevance of this industry to members of Congress. All of the study's findings are derived from analysis of publicly available third-party sources, such as the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics and the U.S. Census Bureau. The number of jobs and sales revenues are provided on a nationally, by state, and by congressional district. Peter Johnson, who has a PhD in economics from Columbia University, worked with me on this job study. The mailing industry continues to provide a significant number of U.S. jobs. The U.S. mailing industry consists of 7.3 million mailing industry jobs, and you heard that number earlier today. The U.S. mailing industry provides 4.6% of the nation's 156 million jobs. The types of mailing industry jobs were divided into 3 categories. 31% of the jobs are from mail production and distribution. These jobs include paper, printing industry suppliers, the Postal Service, and private sector delivery. 23% of the jobs are management of mail within companies, such as the persons whom deliver the mail to each office within a business. And 46% of the jobs are the jobs from mail advertised and delivered goods, such as catalog direct mail generated sales and direct response magazine ad sales and internet shopping. The mailing industry is critical to the economy. The mailing industry is a significant contributor to this US economy at $1.58 trillion in sales revenue. This accounts for 4.3% of the US total output, a very large percentage. The US mailing industry continues to be of significant size. And let me see if I can get this down. I just realized that this was showing, but the US mailing industry is, continues to be significant in size to other key industries. This table depicts the number of jobs and revenue of other key industries with comparable ways of measuring the jobs and also the sales revenue. As a comparison, the mailing industry has a similar amount of jobs and revenue as the US auto industry, with the airline industry, and with the oil and natural gas industry. Therefore, policies that have a dramatic influence on the mailing industry impact many workers. Over 80% of the industry jobs depend upon the delivery infrastructure of the USPS, which is in the center of it. Also, a viable postal service results in a very much a healthier economy. Before going on to that slide, and let me just and do the conclusion, I did want to say, as director of EMA Foundation's Institute of Postal Studies, I, along with EMA, engaged InfoTrends to conduct a national-based and statistically valid primary research study with large mailers to understand their reaction to the proposed rate structure. As expected, large mailers stated that they would reduce mail volume with the proposed rate increases. As the rate increases become larger, more mailers will significantly reduce mail volume at larger rates. Based on this research, I estimate that mail volume from the 2021 rate increases alone will be reduced by over 4%. And that's just from that percentage. It's not from those that already had planned to go to electronic substitution. So these are the key takeaways. The US mailing industry, again, represents 7.3 million jobs, which is 4.4% of the nation's total civilian labor force. And the US mailing industry contributes 1.58 trillion in sales revenue to the US economy, which accounted for 4.3% of the total of US total output of $37 trillion. it is imperative for the mailing industry to be attractive to mailers by keeping the postal rates low and keeping the service levels high. In conclusion, the mailing industry is critical to the U.S. economy. Thank you so much for your interest.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. And now I would like to turn to Alyssa Moses and Kimberly Clark to walk us through the results of the survey they recently conducted through Bellwether Citizen Response on public attitudes toward the Postal Service.
Thank you, Art. It's an honor to be here today. Kimberly is going to start us off, and I will drive, and then I will jump in with some of the data.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having us today. As Art had said, we represent Bellwether Citizen Response, and we do behavioral science and neuroscience, but this study was a straight up survey self-report. And I want to walk you through the methodology that we did over the course of last month. We conducted this survey for C21 on their behalf, but I just want to make sure that we all understand that we are a third party and we carry some objectivity with us. And so we didn't have a horse in this race. We really wanted to understand the impact of the Delivering for America plan. And we wanted to understand to what extent the regular citizen was aware of this particular legislation. And if they were aware, to what extent did they, oh, sorry. Okay, if you have questions. So if they were aware, what were their attitudes towards it? And further, what would be their anticipated behavior change if the Delivering for America plan was initiated? Okay. So Art and the C21 group chose us because we are advocates for understanding the consumer sentiment and the citizen sentiment. And so what we ended up doing was, over the course of, I believe it was June 2nd to June 21st, we impacted this study, initiated this study, and we collected over 2,000 respondents, and we based the respondents off of the most up-to-date census data. So we started off and we had a sample of 50 completes, and then we just wanted to understand how the mechanics of the survey was conducted. And then we did a full launch once we were assured that the data flow and the study mechanics really was going well. And we ended up collecting over 2,110 respondents. And we also oversampled in Northern and Southern California. And again, so we wanted to make sure that we had the correct age breakouts that represented the census data, as well as gender and income levels as well. And this is just to show you an accurate heat map that represented the census data. And then Alyssa will talk to you a little bit about some of the most important findings.
Thank you, Kimberly. The first thing that we really wanted to be able to look at was a sense of how engaged Americans are with the United States Postal Service. And they're very active. On a national level, 60% of Americans are actively sending mail or packages at least once a month. 77% use it most often for regular as well as for business use. And so it's a very engaged public. And you might look at, if you looked at their ratings of satisfaction on an absolute basis, you might say, well, they're pretty satisfied, 68%. Clearly importance is strong, with equal importance placed on mail and packages. But if you look at the asterisk down at the bottom, you'll note that prior studies in 2020 and earlier showed satisfaction levels in the 90% ranges. So from a contextual standpoint, there has been some drop in satisfaction. And the issues abound with concern over the United States Postal Service being cost effective, trustworthy, and likely to be reliable in the future. So this is a little bit of setting the stage in terms of ingoing perceptions. It's a very simple story in some regard, and that is that awareness is so low on critical facts. So look at these majority levels of little or no awareness on upcoming postal price increases. So there's going to be some big surprises in August. The fact that even the Postal Service is not supported by taxpayer dollars, 80% of America doesn't realize that. They don't understand that there's support of 7 million workers in the private sector, or that the Postmaster General's call for layoffs of key employees, or that there's really no awareness of the requirement to pre-fund healthcare retirement funds. So for the large part, the American public is very much in the dark about what's going on. They know what affects them. They know if their Christmas gifts didn't get delivered on time, or if their mailbox isn't where it used to be, but they don't really see this coming. And when we made aware of some of the key components of the Delivering for America plan, deep concern was expressed over multiple issues. So there's real concern about senior citizens waiting for government checks and medication, majority concern about mail rates going up every year, real concern about rate increases on rural areas, whether you live in a rural area or not. Rate increases being driven by the pre-funding, and the fact that there's a rate increase might occur despite the fact that the USPS has cash reserves being solvent. So there is a lot of concern brewing, and it continues. It continues with what this will mean for small businesses, especially mail order businesses, which will have to likely eliminate jobs. There's concern about driving mailer and catalog businesses, a negative effect on charitable fundraising. Community newspapers are of high concern, as well as some of the coastal delays. So what might we expect to happen? And you know, the American public has been affected so much with COVID. They've had to adjust, they've had to pivot. And so when asked what might happen, for instance, with rate increases, you have 68% of respondents saying that they will consider shifting their communications to online. They know they have this option and they are considering it. And the same, nearly 80% will shift to online if delivery times slow. And so the irony here is that you see that the Postal Service is planning to increase rates, to increase revenue, but the action, the response of the public may actually be a boomerang effect, which will send people away from using it and decline revenues. And so in summary, we see that there are major changes planned with far-reaching significance. And yet people are not aware of this, and it's going to potentially impact their medications, social connectedness. It's going to affect business. It's going to affect our charities. And so the findings reveal that the American public is highly concerned when made aware of pending changes, and they are prepared to seek online solutions. So we need to be prepared for that response that's going to happen with the public in the next near future. Thank you.
Thank you, Alyssa and Kimberly. Appreciate that. Next, we're going to turn to Mary Donovan from NDP Analytics, who is going to discuss what the Postal Service financial situation is and what could be done other than these major increases and still result in a stable and growing organization.
All right, thank you, Art. Hope everybody can see my screen now. So like Art said, today I'm going to summarize our research on the Postal Service's Delivering for America strategic plan. And it was interesting to hear what was just said. We have some similar findings in terms of what we expect from consumer behavior and sensitivity to price. But let's jump in. In summary, our research found that above CPI rate increases do not align with the Postal Service's mission and vision, that protecting mail volume is crucial for long-term financial stability, that the assumptions used in delivering for America are outdated, and that our analysis, which incorporates, in our view, more reasonable assumptions, shows that the USPS can reach financial stability without excessive rate increases. So here are the two USPS scenarios that are outlined in Delivering for America. The strategic plan scenario, which implements all of its initiatives, including postal reform and above CPI rate increases, is expected to generate 0.3 billion over 10 years. In this base case, which is the status quo scenario, there's no postal reform, there's only CPI rate increases. The USPS expects that it will lose $160 billion. The mission of the Postal Service, very briefly, is to uphold its universal service obligation, and it aims to do this by operating efficiently and effectively to minimize what it has to charge. And the vision generally is to provide this world-class, affordable service to every American home. So with that, we reviewed the strategic initiatives in Delivering for America. And overall, most really did align with that mission and that vision. We flagged 2 items under management cost savings here that include changes to service standards, because those will degrade customer service. However, our focus of today and our first key finding is that above CPI rate increases do not align with that mission and vision. It hurts the Postal Service's bottom line, and it also hurts USPS customers. Moving to our next key finding about the importance of mail volume. Art's video kind of pointed to this earlier. The Postal Service is in this unique position, right? It has to maintain its universal service obligation while generating enough revenue to cover its cost. So unlike commercial enterprises, the Postal Service can't scale back its network, and it's also not cost effective to rely on fewer paying customers like some luxury brand. So therefore, it's in the best interest of the Postal Service and its employees to have as much of its products and services used as possible. As we saw in the earlier presentation, mail is still very relevant to millions of households and businesses, but customers are sensitive to price, especially with electronic alternatives. And you can see this with the 10% stamp increase in 2019. Greeting card volume, which had grown steadily since 2015, plummeted after the rate increase, and it erased all gains. Similarly, in a survey of major mailers, you can see how above CPI rate increases exacerbate mail declines. And that's what Cheryl was talking about in the first presentation. So this sensitivity to price is important because it impacts the USPS projections. So our third key finding here is that the assumptions used in those Delivering for America projections are overly pessimistic, and understandably so. They were created before a COVID-19 vaccine was approved, so you can imagine the degree of uncertainty was significant. And fortunately, we've done better. Postal and economic performance has exceeded expectations, and most notably here, market dominant mail volume is 7.7 billion pieces higher than expected, which contributes to better operating revenue and better net income. So with knowing those assumptions are outdated, we created an alternative market dominant volume and revenue estimates. Our approach is very simple. Very briefly, historically, the first half of the year counts for just over half of the total annual volume. So to estimate fiscal year 2021, we took the actual data for the first half of the year, we extrapolated out to estimate the end of the year. We used revenue per piece to calculate the revenue. And then for the 10-year projection, we rely on historical pre-COVID volume declines, or in most cases declines, in some cases volume changes, and 1.5 rate increases in revenue per piece to bring out our fiscal year 2021 estimate through 2030. So what did we find? We found that the Postal Service can generate enough revenue without above CPI rate increases. This year, we expect USPS can generate, and this is without that August rate increase, over 5 billion more pieces and nearly 3 billion more in revenue than what they expect in their Delivering for America plan. And by the time we reach fiscal year 2021, with our revised estimate that has less steep volume declines, USPS we expect can generate more volume and more revenue than either of the USPS scenarios. So our final step is to see how this new projection impacts the Postal Service's actual bottom line. That's what matters at the end of the day, right? If they can be financially stable. So what we did was we took that strategic plan scenario that we showed in one of those first slides where they can generate 0.3 billion over 10 years. And for our alternative scenarios, we simply took the underlying data and replaced it with some new assumptions. All of our scenarios, we created 3, use that revised market dominant projection that we talked about earlier. Our first scenario also assumes higher than expected controllable costs to reflect higher personnel costs that they've experienced so far this year. The second projection, or the second scenario, is just saying we think Postal Service, what you said about cost is correct. We just use theirs. And then the third scenario, we have higher than expected competitive, which is a package volume, and higher than expected cost to reflect some historical trends. So we'll see how that plays out. Here's our fifth and final finding. Over time, USPS can achieve a better financial position without above CPI rate increases if it implements its other strategic initiatives. As you can see, most of our scenarios, which are the bars on the right, green, yellow, and gray, take a little bit more time to surpass the USPS strategic plan. But in time, they do generate more net income annually because they maintain more mail volume. And our third scenario with that increase in package volume starts generating the most income annually starting in 2030. So in short, all of our scenarios show that with the ability to maintain mail volume or protect mail volume, you can earn more, you can have better net income over 10 years. So in closing, just to reemphasize, the USPS is better off implementing its other strategic initiatives and protecting mail volume because, in short, with more customers and more volume, it will be better off in the long run. So with that, I will hand it back to you.
Thank you, Mary. I really appreciate that, and I appreciate everything that everyone on this first panel has contributed here, and hope that that those who are plugged into this Zoom are finding this informative and helpful. Just a reminder, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and we will get to them, as many of them as we possibly can. So let's turn to our second panel, which will detail the impacts of these increased rates and service downgrade on the various classes of mail. And I just want to remind everyone that, again, our coalition supports the Postal Service Reform Act as it is written, but also believes that Congress needs to take action on directing the Postal Regulatory Commission to reconsider the decision it made last fall, as Congressman Grothman referred to, that opened the door to the Postal Service imposing rate increases at triple and quadruple inflation on top of an increase from earlier this year, while service is going to be downgraded with implications, especially for small businesses and charities everywhere who are so dependent on not only promoting what their cause or their business is, but on getting remittances back in time to be able to use them, to be able to pay their vendors and so forth. So we believe Congress should direct the commission to reconsider its prior decision and this time take into account all of the changes wrought by the pandemic year. I would just add that the commission decision was based on a record that closed in March of 2020. And we would like them to consider everything that's happened since. We do not ask Congress to put its thumb on the scale on the outcome, or of course, to actually set rates, but to simply direct the commission to take into consideration everything that's happened since. So with that, let's turn to our second panel. George White has been president and COO of Up With Paper, the world's leading pop-up greeting card company, since 2004. Since 2016, he has also served as Group General Manager, Consumer Products for the CM Paula Company. He started his career right here as a legislative director and then chief of staff. He's a graduate of Duke, and he is now president of the Greeting Card Association. Brett Wessner is chair of the National Newspaper Association, which represents 1,600 community newspapers in all 50 states. A native of Cordell, Oklahoma, where his publishing company is based, Brett was press secretary to the chairman of the U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee during the Iran-Contra hearings. His family's companies now publish 27 locally focused titles in 5 states. Hamilton Davison is president and executive director of the American Catalog Mailers Association. He has had a long career in business, leading several greeting card production and retailing companies and a strategic consulting firm. He is an expert in strategic marketing and promotion and a proud son of Vanderbilt with a master's from UTEP. Jim Cochran capped off an illustrious, lengthy career at the Postal Service by serving as the Chief Marketing and Sales Officer, under whose watch successful programs such as mail promotions and Every Door Direct Mail were launched. Today, he is president of the Parcel Shippers Association and has degrees from Monmouth and American universities. So with that, I would like to turn to George to start.
Great, Art, I appreciate it. Again, my name is George White. I'm currently president of the Greeting Card Association, which is the industry's trade association with almost 200 members who make or support the making of greeting cards, as well as of Up With Paper, a mid-sized greeting card publisher here in Ohio. We specialize in handmade pop-up greeting cards. And as Art indicated, I did start my career as an LA and then finally an AA on the House side back in the 80s, a million years ago. So I'm here this morning to speak from the perspective of the first-class mail category. So this class encompasses both mail pieces sent with a forever stamp, known as single-piece mail, as well as commercial mail largely sent through a product called pre-sort first class. Together, these mail pieces are a huge contributor to the USPS, generating revenues estimated to total $24 billion this year. Greeting card publishers like my company produce cards and invitations, more than half of which are delivered to their final recipient via the US mail. There really is no other alternative to the USPS for us. Our products totaled almost 1.8 billion pieces of mail in 2020, driving Americans to their mailboxes in the hope of what we call a red carpet event at the mailbox when they are received. Millions of other small businesses also utilize the same product to send information, correspondence, and invoices, and to receive timely payments from their customers. Large commercial mailers also depend on first class to send bills and statements, as well as critical health and financial information needed by their customers, and they too rely on timely remittances of payments through the mail. All these groups are facing challenges emerging from the pandemic, which will be exacerbated by postage increases this summer far in excess of the rate of inflation, and in a time frame for which few were able to budget due to the Postal Service's decision to raise postage prices in August rather than January as it normally does. These postage increases will likely drive first-class mailers of all types away from using mail. This is not speculation. As Mary showed in her presentation, when the USPS imposed a nickel increase 2 years ago, at 10%, the largest in increase, the greeting card industry saw a huge decline in volume mailed, specifically a 46% drop in mailed holiday cards that are most sensitive to postage costs. And this followed 3 consecutive years of increases in mailed greeting cards. With the proposed August increase of nearly 8% for commercial first-class mail, we can again expect large volume losses in this high revenue, high profit class, and not just in greeting cards, but in bills and bill paying, as that is mail that is easy to divert to electronic alternatives. Keep in mind that this first-class mail already receives a markup of more than 300%. Further note that these increases are also coupled with a slowdown in service that will make the migration trend from mail worse in the commercial sector and negatively impact the timely receipt of payments. We strongly support postal reform legislation, as Art mentioned, but we're calling on Congress to add a provision to the appropriations bill or the reform bill itself to ensure that the PRC conducts another review of rate changes to factor in the impact of the pandemic, the substantial relief from Congress the USPS received last year, the dramatically improved financial performance of the Postal Service versus original expectations this year, again, as Mary showed in her presentation, and the significant financial reforms in the bill itself. It is important to keep in mind that while it is not Congress's responsibility to set postage rates, nor are we asking for that, the 2006 Postal Reform Accountability and Enhancement Act promised all mailers that the cumbersome and lengthy rate-setting process would be exchanged for a rate cap system that would ensure stable and predictable rates. For many years, that occurred, but it is no longer the case, and it is therefore vital that Congress step in to ensure that the most up-to-date estimates for USPS financial liabilities are used in rate setting. Thanks for your consideration. And as Art indicated, I'd be happy to handle any questions via the chat.
Thank you, George. Next, let's turn to Brett.
Thanks, Art. As Art said, I represent 1,600 newspapers through the National Newspaper Association. Our members tend to be smaller community outlets. There are actually 7,000 community newspapers in the United States in every congressional district. We do have members of our own association in all 50 states. Our members tend to be, we do have members in urban and suburban areas. Most of our members are in rural areas. Typically, we are the only reliable source of information in the towns that in which we do business. Most of the towns in which we're involved certainly don't have television stations. They're not typically covered by metro dailies, and most don't even have radio stations. So we really are the only source of reliable information in those communities, covering the city council and the school board and the local sports teams. So we're a vital part of those communities. And in fact, when a town loses its community newspaper, it is a shocking event, and we're typically begged to come back. The newspaper industry, as you know, has been under siege for 10 or 15 years. Certainly the pandemic did not help. And on top of that, a double-digit increase in postal rates certainly does not help us. Community newspapers are traditionally weekly newspapers, which means we rely almost completely on the Postal Service to deliver our papers to our readers. It's very difficult to put together a home delivery system for a weekly newspaper. So we're completely reliant on the Postal Service, and have been since colonial days. In fact, it could be argued that we have a Postal Service because of newspapers. We have always been seen as integral to American democracy. And we continue to play that role in the communities which we represent. To put the postal rate increase into perspective for our communities, typically for a weekly newspaper, postal rates postal expenses are our third highest expense. So postal costs for us are not a small amount of money. They are as I said, the third highest expense on our expense sheets. So when you have a double-digit increase, it definitely takes people by surprise, and it's very difficult for us to handle, especially, as I said, during the difficult times that we've already been facing on top of the pandemic. It is also a very difficult time to pass along rate increases to our readers, all of whom have suffered, of course, from the pandemic as well. So we're sort of caught in a bind in which we see this dramatic increase in rates and are really not able to pass those on to our readers. The other issue that I'd like to talk about is service. Typically, we have been pleased with the service within county distribution of our newspapers. The traditional newspaper bundles its papers in a very easy to deliver way. We do a lot of work for the Postal Service, and we have actually quite good service within our counties. We're oftentimes the largest mailer of the local post office, and we have great relationships there. Out of county is a different story. And out of county delivery of our newspapers, I've said that your chances are better rolling dice in the alleyway than getting a out of county newspaper delivered on time. We're working with the Postal Service now to try to resolve some of those issues. But when we're facing an increasing rates and a decrease in service, it is a very difficult thing to sell to our customers. So we're facing not only the difficulties of the market itself, but also a double-digit increase, which we don't think is necessary and will have a dramatic effect on community newspapers. Thanks, Art.
Thank you, Brett. Next, Hamilton, please.
Thank you for your interest in postal affairs and for a holistic understanding of what drives the system. Marketing mail, which I've been asked to talk about, is a broad category that includes catalogs, letters, and postcards, newsletters, bulletins, advertising circulars, printed matter, and small parcels. It does not get the service levels of first-class mail, and it is deferrable whenever the Postal Service wishes to do so for load leveling purposes. It is highly prepared and entered deep into the system to keep Postal Service costs as low as possible. It is widely used across most every type of business, both large and small. Marketing mail is highly price sensitive, as marketers are keen to get as much done at the lowest possible cost as they can. Alternatives include email, digital media, and even billboard or print advertising in newspapers or publications. Owners, bosses, and particularly CFOs, they're constantly asking about the return on investment, or ROI, from various marketing alternatives. So pressure for efficiency and cost effectiveness is intense. While deferrable at the option of the Postal Service, marketing mail does need to be delivered in a service window that is predictable and reliable, so marketers can synchronize all their marketing messaging around a single mail event. You get a letter or catalog, and about that time, you also receive an email or other contact reinforcing an offer. Businesses also use expected delivery windows to staff their call centers and their warehouses. Lately, service performance of marketing mail has been challenged. We hope this peak season will be better. Marketing mail is highly useful and valued by consumers. Think about church bulletins or Little League schedules, or the importance for rural and elderly Americans to get access to things they want and need that are not easy to procure otherwise, or the working family seeking to get coupons, penny savers, or discounts to make their money go further, or the retail therapy a catalog provides. Marketing mail is a growth area that can offset first-class declines, although it takes more marketing mail pieces to offset each first-class piece lost. The prospect of large and unpredictable rate increases is the greatest threat to marketing mail against what would otherwise be a boom time given the economic and consumer activity that has materialized. The density adjuster factor, recently promulgated by the Postal Regulatory Commission, is particularly problematic, as it is known only after the companies have established their budgets each year, leading to a mid-year surprise such as we have just experienced. And the lack of visibility into a major cost center makes it exceedingly hard to run a business that relies on the mail. Since over 90% of postal red ink is due to the overly aggressive pre-funding obligation, passage of postal reform is critical to marketers. Given that the PRC closed the docket on the 10-year review in March of 2020, before the pandemic and any legislation, we would respectfully request the PRC be directed by Congress to re-review its recently granted rate authority and rate adjustment mechanism with recent developments in mind. Delivery days, delays, and above inflation, and unpredictable postage increases will accelerate the digital diversion. Historical numbers show that a percentage of mail that leaves the system never returns. In an integrated system that needs all the volume it can get, given the continuing interest in marketing mail use, it is imperative that marketing mail be managed properly for long-term growth. We really appreciate your taking the time to better understand mail and the long-term success drivers that power a significant segment of the economy and well over 7 million good paying jobs. Thank you.
Thank you, Hamilton. And now, last but hardly least, I want to turn to Jim Cochran.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being with us today. Let me just introduce PSA. We really represent the entire ecosystem around shipping. It's obviously shippers, the Amazons and Walmarts, but we have software vendors that support small business. That be Shopify and Shippo and Stamps.com, and so there's it's a robust ecosystem, and they really need a vital and efficient and consistency in delivery from the Postal Service. That e-commerce in this country has grown in many ways on the back of the Postal Service. And as you heard my bio, I spent a lot of time in the Postal Service. And I always used to tell the sales team, anytime I got a chance to speak to them, that the most important thing is keeping the mailbox relevant. As long as the mailbox is relevant with content that's interesting to Americans, we're going to keep doing the right thing, which is part of the mandate of the Postal Service. On the shipping side, we're not staring at these kind of increases above CPI. We're not held to CPI. It's, once again, it's a competitive space, and the Postal Service competes vigorously with UPS and FedEx. And COVID, created an entire challenge for the entire industry for a period of time. But even now, the Postal Service year over year has declining volumes. UPS just announced declining volumes. So there's a lot of change going on in this in the shipping business. But think about, I heard it a few times in presentations today about medicine in the mail. The country relies on delivery of goods, and in particular, rural areas don't have the shopping conveniences that you have in the urban areas. And the Postal Service is used tremendously in those areas, well beyond, I'll say, some of the traditional competitors who also use the Postal Service to deliver in some of those spaces. So, once again, the thing that worries me a little bit on some of the service issues, the inconsistency, is, the pandemic is last year was a really interesting year, and, the exponential growth in the amount of packages going through the networks for everybody. But it's getting back to normal now. And UPS and FedEx are very good at what they do. And the Postal Service needs to be very good at what they do. And one of the things they're looking to do right now is move first-class packages to up to 5 days. And depending on where you are, it's that, the numbers that are filed would say it's only going to be, whatever, 20%. But if you're in Southern California, if you're in Washington, if you're in the corners of the country, the effect is half your volume is going to slip in time in transit. So, and this is at a time when everybody in the entire industry is trying to get closer to customers. That's why 3PLs are growing. Ship from store companies like Target and Walmart are picking right off the shelf and trying to deliver it. Everyone's trying to keep up with the Amazon effect that is real in the United States. And meanwhile, the Postal Service is going in the other direction, which doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm afraid they're going to lose some revenue on that one. And we don't want them to lose revenue. We want them to continue to grow their shipping business. We rely on the Postal Service. Our members rely on the Postal Service to provide great service. So, once again, we get these bumps. And this past January, our lightweight parcels went up 20%, one price change. So it's a little bit different than not held to the CPI issues. But once again, the Postal Service needs packages to grow, and they need to keep mail volume in the system. And if they continue to do that, I see a very successful future for them. But I worry about the significance of some of these price changes on mail, because we want to have, just like it's in the legislation, we want to have an integrated delivery network delivering packages and magazines and catalogs and nonprofits and medicines, et cetera. And if we can do that, I see a healthy and vital future for the Postal Service. But there's worry right now out there. So I know we're getting up against the hour, so I'll stop there. But thanks for an opportunity to talk about the boxes, which is my passion.
All right, thank you, Jim. And I do see that we are slightly over, so I want to thank everybody for tuning in for this, very comprehensive discussion of the Postal Service and its issues, particularly on rates and service. And again, we will be in touch with a number of you about the need for a second review by the commission. And in particular, we would really like to obtain your support for that. We remain in support of the Postal Service Reform Act, as has been mentioned here. But I think you can see from everything you've heard that there are other directions to go. The public is not happy about these changes and is really going to be surprised for the most part when they take effect. You've heard about the implications for businesses in every category of the mail. And this applies not just to the members of our coalition, but to businesses everywhere. Every business in America relies to one extent or another on the Postal Service. Every charity and nonprofit relies on the Postal Service to one extent or another. So we just leave you with that. And we're very happy to talk with any of you who would like to have some discussion offline. Otherwise, we'll look forward to engaging with you either for the first time or further than we already have. So with that, let me thank all of our extraordinary panelists who all did such a great job. We really appreciate it. And as well to Congressman Grothman. And we look forward to having further discussions with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.